Imagine you arrive somewhere at exactly 2 o'clock. You are not late. You are not early. You did exactly what you were told. And yet, nothing happens. So you sit down, look at the clock, then the door. You wait. 5 minutes becomes 10. 10 becomes 20. And eventually, something strange happens. You stop asking, why am I still waiting? You start thinking, I suppose this is just how it works. That little shift is more important than it seems. Because a waiting room doesn't simply hold people until something happens. It teaches them how to live with something that hasn't happened yet. For most of history, waiting was tied to a visible reason. The rain, a meal cooking, someone coming back. But the modern waiting room introduced a new kind of waiting. Waiting because a system told you to. And once humans got comfortable sitting still while an invisible process happened elsewhere, we started accepting delays in almost every part of life. The appointment, the train, the interview, the hospital, even the future itself. So how did a simple room teach millions of people to accept a life lived partly on hold? Picture a modern waiting room. A few chairs, a clock, a receptionist behind a desk, and a door that opens every few minutes. One person disappears through it. Everyone else stays behind. Nobody explains the rules, you already understand them. You don't demand to be next. You sit, you wait, and you accept that someone else controls when your life continues. That sounds normal now, but the room is part of a much bigger historical shift. As transportation, medicine, and government services grew more organized, people's movement began depending on schedules and systems. Railways are a perfect example. Early passenger stations already included waiting rooms. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway, opened in 1830, had them right beside the platforms. You could arrive before your train while the train sat somewhere else entirely, and your only job was to wait. The room wasn't producing anything, but it gave waiting a place, and that changed everything. Before organized systems ran daily life, waiting was often tied directly to the event itself. Imagine waiting for a blacksmith. You can see the work happening, hear the hammer, know exactly why you're waiting. Now picture something different. You arrive at a station. A clock says your train leaves at 3:15. The train isn't there, and nothing you do can make it arrive faster. You are no longer waiting for a person. You are waiting for a system. And humans needed a new skill for that: how to stay still while expecting a system to move. Railway waiting rooms became one of the earliest architectural answers to this problem. But the railway wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Now put 10 strangers inside the same room. They don't know each other and may never meet again. Yet within seconds they understand something remarkable. There is an order. Someone arrived first, someone second, someone last. Nobody needs a police officer explaining this. And if someone tries to skip everyone, the room instantly changes. Heads turn, someone says, "Excuse me, there's a line." That tiny sentence reveals something enormous. Waiting has become a social contract. A room full of strangers agrees the person who arrived first deserves to move first. Not because they're stronger or richer. Simply because they waited longer. The waiting room turns time itself into a kind of social currency. You paid with minutes, so your place is protected by minutes. And once people accept that rule, they become remarkably easy to organize. Now imagine an appointment. You're told, 3 p.m. You arrive at 2:55 and sit down. 3 o'clock arrives. Nothing. 3:15, still nothing. And here the waiting room teaches its most powerful lesson. You begin separating your time from the system's time. Your body is ready, your attention is ready, but the system isn't. So you wait. This became especially visible in medicine. After Britain's NHS was created in 1948, patients negotiated their own expectations against the doctor's schedule, arriving early and accepting an informal order based on who showed up first. The appointment system seemed like a solution to waiting, and in many ways it was. But psychologically, it introduced something new. You weren't just waiting for the doctor. You were given a time slot in the future, a promise. And if that promise was delayed, you simply waited longer and accepted it. Here's the strange part. Waiting isn't measured only by minutes. 2 minutes can feel enormous. 20 minutes can vanish without you noticing. What? Because we don't experience waiting like a stopwatch. We experience it psychologically. How long a delay feels depends less on the clock and more on uncertainty, fairness, and what we're doing while we wait. So the waiting room isn't really designed to make time disappear. It's designed to make the delay feel acceptable. Give someone a chair, a number, a clock, an explanation, and the same 20 minutes suddenly feels completely different. The room becomes more than architecture. It becomes psychological technology quietly telling you, there is a reason you're not moving. And humans are surprisingly good at accepting delay, as long as it looks organized. Compare that to standing outside a locked door with no explanation and no clock. The wait feels identical in length but far more unbearable because it has no structure. Structure is what turns helplessness into procedure. Instead of thinking, why is nobody doing anything, you think, I'm waiting for my turn. And that one shift makes the delay feel like a rule instead of a failure. Eventually, the waiting room didn't need four walls anymore. The idea had already escaped. The station taught you to wait for the train. The doctor's office taught you to wait for your appointment. The government office taught you to wait for your application. The employer taught you to wait for an answer. The modern world filled up with invisible waiting rooms. Sometimes you don't even know what you're waiting for. You send an application, nothing happens so you wait. You send a message, no reply so you wait. You see the word processing, so you wait. The room has disappeared. But the behavior remains. You're still sitting quietly in the same psychological chair. A waiting system doesn't just control when people receive something, it shapes how they behave while they wait. You get quieter. You watch the clock. You compare your position with everyone around you. You learn who's ahead, who's behind, and what counts as cheating. That's why someone cutting in line can make 10 strangers angry at once. They're not just stealing a position, they're breaking the invisible agreement that makes waiting bearable. If everyone must surrender time, everyone must surrender it equally. That idea quietly became one of the unspoken rules of modern public life. But the biggest change wasn't what waiting did to our behavior in public. It was what it did to our relationship with the future. A waiting room teaches you that something important can exist later. Not now. Later. Your train is later. Your appointment is later. Your results are later. And somehow, you sit inside the present while mentally living in that future moment. We spend enormous parts of our lives preparing to resume our lives. Waiting for the meeting to finish, for Friday, for the promotion, for life to begin. That's the deeper lesson hidden inside the waiting room. It teaches you that your life can be temporarily paused while the system decides when to continue it. Look around the next time you're waiting, a clinic, an airport, a reception desk. Notice what everyone does. We check the clock, then our phones. We look toward the door. We calculate how long we've been there and wonder how much longer. And then we sit back down. That tiny movement says everything. We've learned the rules. We know getting angry won't make the door open faster. We know someone else controls the process. And most of the time we simply accept it. The waiting room never needed to convince us that waiting was enjoyable. It only needed to convince us that waiting was normal. And once waiting became normal, delay became easy to build into everyday life. So maybe the waiting room didn't teach humans to be patient. Maybe it taught us something more useful and more unsettling. It taught us to separate time from action, to sit still while something important happens somewhere else, to trust a system we cannot see, to accept that our turn will eventually come, and to believe that being delayed doesn't necessarily mean something has gone wrong. That's why the waiting room is such an ordinary object. A few chairs, a clock, a door. Nothing about it looks revolutionary, but it helped normalize a strange modern idea, that sometimes the correct way to move forward is to do nothing. And once humans learned to sit comfortably inside that pause, the waiting room no longer needed to exist, because we had learned to carry it with us. Into the hospital, into the office, into the inbox, into the phone, and eventually into the future itself. That may be the quietest lesson an ordinary room ever taught us. Your life doesn't always stop when you're waiting. Sometimes, you've simply been taught to live in the waiting.